better known by its Indonesian and Actionese acronym GAM, launched an armed uprising to end Indonesian rule and establish an independent state. In response, Indonesia responded with a major counterinsurgency campaign, and by the end of the decade, it looked as if the attempt to break away was over. However, a decade later, GAM resurfaced and fighting resumed. Soon afterwards, Aceh was placed under de facto military rule. Over the course of the 1990s, the insurgency continued, albeit with apparently limited wider support. This changed in 1999 following the Indonesian government's decision to let East Timor, which lay at the other end of the country, hold a referendum on independence. This now led to greater and more widespread calls for Acehese secession. Once again, the government launched a major crackdown. But, as so often happens in such cases, this only served to heighten pro-independence sentiment. Despite the tough response on the ground, behind the scenes, the government of Indonesia now agreed to hold talks with GAM. With external support, the two sides began negotiations, and by the end of 2002, it looked like they'd reached an agreement. Both sides would scale back their military activities, and Aceh would be given greater self-rule. However, in the months that followed, the agreement ran into trouble as the sides accused each other of breaking the terms of the deal. In May 2003, following a meeting in Tokyo, the talks broke down completely. At this point, the Indonesian government decided to abandon negotiations and pursue a military solution. Within days, it had ordered an all-out offensive to end the insurgency. In the year that followed, GAM suffered significant losses, and it increasingly looked as if the military campaign might well be on course for victory. Ultimately, though, another factor would now end the conflict. On December the 26th, 2004, a massive earthquake, the third largest ever recorded, struck just off the coast of Aceh. The death toll across the entire Indian Ocean was huge. Estimates suggest that up to 250,000 people lost their lives. As one would expect, Aceh was struck particularly hard. It's estimated that anywhere up to 170,000 Acehese died in the disaster, and 500,000 became homeless. Under these circumstances, the armed quest for independence was unsustainable. Having already lost up to half its forces during the military crackdown, and given the devastation caused by the earthquake, GAM saw no choice but to enter new talks. Meanwhile, the Indonesian government also appeared to see the chance to end a long-standing insurgency. In early 2005, a new peace initiative was launched under the auspices of Martti Ahtisaari, the former president of Finland. On the 15th of August 2005, after months of talks, the government of Indonesia and the Free Aceh movement signed a peace agreement. At the centre of the deal was a decision to end the calls for independence. As the Memorandum of Understanding between the Indonesian government and GAM stated, the parties commit themselves to creating conditions within which the government of the Acehese people can be manifested through a fair and democratic process within the unitary state and constitution of the Republic of Indonesia. In return, Aceh was now given extensive self-government, including significant control over economic affairs. It also received an undertaking that the Indonesian government would consult on any matters directly affecting the province. On top of this, GAM agreed to give up its arms, and an amnesty was agreed for its fighters. Additionally, and to ensure proper implementation of the deal, the agreement would be monitored by the European Union and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. After 30 years of conflict, the campaign for Aceh independence was at an end. Very occasionally, secessionist movements have won their independence. In other cases, they've secured a long-term stalemate and the creation of a de facto state. More often than not, the conflict has only ended by force of arms. Aceh is a particularly unusual example of an armed separatist dispute that has been brought to an end by peaceful means with a decision to keep the territory in question within the parent state. So what made Aceh stand out? While it would be nice to say that the conflict was ripe for settlement and that the situation was carefully managed by external peacemakers, in truth it seems that the Indonesian government had in fact settled on a military end to the conflict. And by all accounts it looked like its efforts were succeeding. Of course it's impossible to say whether they would have eventually brought an end to the insurgency. And even if it had, then there was always a chance of yet another return to conflict, or at least a resurgence of calls for independence. Indeed, even within the peace deal, renewed calls for statehood in the future can't be entirely ruled out. Instead, the whole situation was fundamentally changed by one of the worst natural disasters in modern history. This not only made fighting the insurgency politically, economically and reputationally costly for all sides at a time of such huge human suffering, it meant that the full resources of the Indonesian state were now needed for recovery. On top of this, and to be blunt, it also gave a face-saving way for both sides to end the conflict. GAM could end the insurgency and Indonesia could be seen to offer extensive autonomy. So while the conflict in Aceh represents a welcome and widely cited example of a negotiated settlement to a long-standing armed secessionist conflict, it's also important to recognise the very special circumstances that brought it about. I hope you found this interesting. If so, here are some more videos that you might like. And don't forget to subscribe for more. I post new videos every Friday. Thanks so much for watching and see you in the next video.